Good evening. My name is Debbie Lawler, and I'm the Planning Discipline Leader and Regional Manager for Collier's Engineering Designs Planning Department. I'm here tonight to talk to you a bit about the process that we are going through to come up with a coastal resiliency plan for the region that's covering 4 municipalities, the towns of Westbrook, Clinton, and Old Saybrook, and the borough of Fenwick. And just bear with me as I go through this because the setup's a little bit new to me. So the overview for the meeting tonight is I'm going to talk to you a bit about what the project purpose is, tell you who's involved and what roles we're all playing in terms of the municipality representatives and gathering of information by technical professionals. Talk about the scope of the project, a little bit about the schedule, the public engagement that we've been doing and why we're doing it, and a bit about what we've learned so far and the next steps that go towards creation of the plan. So first, the project purpose. So why create a coastal resiliency plan? Well, first of all, and a lot of people ask me, like, how is this being funded, okay? So there is funding that came down through a grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Long Island Sound Futures Fund. And there's other funding that the state is coming down with to do resiliency type planning and other projects associated with it. So in terms of looking at it, the 4 towns realized that they were doing a lot of work and other projects and a lot of information gathering, and there's been several renditions of resiliency related type projects in each of the towns. But in terms of looking at it, nobody was looking at it together yet. And they decided when the funding was becoming available to go after the grant together, which makes a lot of sense when you look at resiliency planning, because as I like to say, your flooding doesn't stop at your municipal boundary line. So it's important to know like what the neighbor's doing to help and try to work together to make the shoreline more resilient for everyone. So in terms of the way that we're looking at it, it's to look at existing and future events that deal with, flooding, sea level rise, how that's impacting the area, and to ultimately come up with a shared vision of a variety of strategies that will make the whole area more resilient over time. So as I said, this isn't like the first plan that everybody's been doing or looking at in terms of resiliency and sustainability type planning. We have Clinton's Coastal Community Resilience Report. Westbrook has done work for the hazard mitigation plan, so has Old Saybrook and Fenwick. And then Old Saybrook has also done a coastal resilience and adaptation study. All this information is being gathered. A lot of the types of concepts that were proposed are being looked at to determine which may be the ones to elevate first in terms of setting priorities as we move forward. So in terms of building on the local knowledge, we're meeting with lots of different people and groups. So the municipal staff we're meeting with, we have an executive committee that's composed of 2 representatives from each of the municipalities. And we will also be looking at staff that can give us key information. Police, fire, EMS, parks departments, staff that has information gathered. We're also looking at the towns, talking to the town's coastal resiliency committees or task forces, the beach associations, and the community at large. So a bit about what resiliency is. It's the capacity of the social ecological system to absorb and withstand disturbances and other stressors and still maintain its basic structure and function. What this means is that we're looking at not only the physical environment, but the social environment, which means the people, where you live, and how this all comes into play when we are in a situation where we're addressing things like flooding. So resilience is preparing for and improving the ability to recover and bounce back from climate events. And in this case, it says county, but we mean the 4-area region. And in terms of adaptation, we're going to be looking at what changes can be implemented to ensure that we can live and adapt with climate change as it's occurring over long periods of time. And in terms of mitigation, things like adaptation, just for an example, is like building elevations. You know, you see houses being raised, but that means that zoning codes have to be changed to address that. So another aspect that we look at is mitigation, and this could be tackling the causes of climate change that are associated with greenhouse gas emissions, renewable energy, and things on that order. So some of the climate stressors that we're analyzing with this study deal with sea level rise, and we'll talk a little bit about modeling in a few minutes. The coastal erosion, and that's where we've been talking to the public about identifying areas that we go back out and we're looking at. Besides just analyzing this stuff ourselves in the field and with mapping, we want to know who's experiencing what and where, and on what types of flood events. And this information has been really coming in from the public quite well at the events that we've been doing. Also, extreme precipitation and flooding, that's analyzed through a lot of the modeling and FEMA mapping. That's the Federal Emergency Management Act maps that we have access to. We can see levels of flooding. We want to talk about storm surges and high winds that impact the flooding further, because it's not just the elevation of the flood. A lot of times when you're in a coastal area, the storm surge makes a big difference. And then extreme heat events and warmer winters that are, you know, causing sea level rise come into play when we're doing this analysis. So some of the benefits that are associated with resiliency planning is that we're trying to come up with concepts ultimately, and some of them are physical improvements, capital improvements that a municipality will seek to make. Other things are softer type of actions that may be like changing a zoning code, because that ultimately impacts what gets built in an area. So we're looking at the protection of homes and businesses, infrastructure like roads. It could also mean utility lines in areas, protecting the Long Island Sound and, you know, plant and animal life in that area. It's also looking at protection of your beaches, wetland areas, and coastal attractions like marinas. Proactively preparing for future natural hazards, so we'll know if things are rising. When something happens, do we have better evacuation measures in place? At what point do these need to be activated? And building local capacity. That means that we're getting more and more people involved, more and more people are listening to what's happening, and we're looking at the changes together from municipality to municipality in this region. All that together allows us to become more resilient as a region. And some of the word kind of qualities and words that you hear throughout the process are things like becoming more diversified, having more ecological variability, trying to come up with ways that redundant systems, so if certain things get knocked out, like telecommunications, what's the backup for that? You know, everybody knows about generators, you know, for your backup for electric type systems, but there's other redundancies that we have to be thinking about. And we look across lots of different spectrums. So we may look at what's happening nationally, in the state itself, in the region that we're looking at the local level, and then also what can the individual landowners be doing to become more resilient. We look at it also from the ecological scale. We look at watersheds, and you can see how lots of the different water bodies flow into each other and flow into the sound. And also back the Connecticut River. You know, how does this impact everyone along these waterways? again, some of the things that we've seen across a number of states, and people addressed this when we were actually doing a field tour, was that the Connecticut River, as it's flowing, you know, and it connects through Massachusetts, New Hampshire and stuff, and as it's coming down through the state of Connecticut, these water bodies, it brings along things that are happening in other states. So if New York or Vermont had a major, you know, incident that took place, some things like these trees that are ending up in the marsh are flowing down, and they're visible when people are watching this on, you know, a global type of video. So it's not just that, you know, that tree didn't fall down in the neighborhood. It came down, and now it's here. Big things with things like that are that you don't want them to block off areas where they actually cause localized flooding by holding things back or causing more debris behind them. So in the interconnectedness of the system, we're looking at everything that comes into play in a municipality. It's the economics of the businesses, it's the residents in their homes, it's the infrastructure, it's your cultural resources that could get impacted, your natural systems that include your marshes and, you know, other natural areas, and then just health and social aspects that come into play would be things like, you know, access to your health services during an event. And then politically, it's also looking at all the things that make a municipality. You know, you get flooded out, and maybe we look at saying, oh, a park could be a flood area. Well, did that just knock out all the sports that's taking place for the next couple of months? We're trying to work this all together to see what comes into play and the best way of doing it. So now talking a little bit about the roles and responsibilities. As I mentioned, there was an executive committee made up of two people from each of the 4 municipalities. We're talking to key stakeholders like representatives of municipal departments. We're talking to the public. We'll be talking to representatives of like the Chamber of Commerce, groups like that, the beach associations. And then we're the consultant team and the consultant team. These are the representatives from the municipalities. Just, I'll go over this in a moment, and then I'll go on to the consultants. But what this group is doing is basically they're overseeing the project. They're helping us to make arrangements for meeting with the public, meeting with key stakeholders, giving them regular status updates on where we are. They'll review the draft deliverables that we can then present to the municipalities in public forums where you'll see the output later on. The local experts that we're talking to, basically they help to contribute to the asset mapping, which we're going to ask you later on to give us some information on. And that would be areas that it would be bad or impacted. That could be anything from a roadway to a firehouse to a school, anything that you think is a critical asset that we need to be looking at. Providing some input on issues or opportunities that you see, like, is it a roadway that could be raised, that should be raised? That may be something that would be an opportunity. Assist in project identification and prioritization as we're going along. We'll be looking at all the comments that we're getting. We'll start to set some concepts and ideas that could be implemented. We'll be asking key stakeholders and others to weigh in on priorities. And then just to provide input at the, once we have a draft plan, to see where there may be some room for, tweaking it in the end before we do a final. If there's anything that's been missed, anything that should be added in the time period that we've been looking at. The consultants, I represent Colliers Engineering and Design. We're multifaceted engineering, architecture, planning, environmental, traffic, the whole 9 yards type of a firm. And your QEA is partnered with us. They are doing the modeling. So the flood level modeling for Long Island Sound, which they actually have done work in the area in the past, so they have some baseline information. They're very familiar with the state. and they do a lot of work that's associated with FEMA type mapping and these types of flood modeling. So from the modeling, after that, and once we get all the information gathered about key asset areas, areas of flooding, we'll be looking at layering the modeling information, which goes beyond just, many people know the 100-year flood line or the FEMA vulnerability areas based on flooding maps that are current. The model will take it out to several other model years. I believe that we had 2050 and 2070 in our original proposal as to what would be years for modeling it out further. And then we would be taking those to see what areas over time become more and more vulnerable and what might be done to address them at different points in time. And again, developing that into the plan. So in terms of scope and schedule, we're at the point where we're talking to the community, talking to all stakeholders about the community assets. We are just getting started with Anchor doing the hydrodynamic modeling at the same time. So when we're done with basically the data gathering stage and Anchor is done with theirs, then we'll be looking at the risk assessment, looking at the vulnerable areas and how they overlap with the different flood interval mapping from the model. And then from there, we'll be looking at potential projects and strategies to make the area more resilient. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we look at lots of different aspects of the town, but when we are doing it, we're trying to stay along the same lines that FEMA uses for their recovery framework, so that there's consistency to it. And the important part about this is that by doing it this way, as future grants come out, it's kind of set up using the same system that the federal agencies use to look at and evaluate criteria. So it'll be housing, it'll be the infrastructure systems, like I said, health and social services, your natural environment and cultural resources, and then the economic systems of the municipalities. So as we're looking at potential concepts for resiliency, we'll be addressing them like using those types of categories as we're moving through the system. In terms of anticipating the flood hazards, talking about the modeling a little bit, they'll be doing the sea level rise scenarios that I just mentioned, looking at parameters of the scenarios to be developed. We've been discussing that, starting to discuss that with the executive committee in the last week or so. The modeling will be ground truth. So what that means is that when we look at the current conditions in a model, we'll be reaching back out to say, does this area flood the way that this is saying right now? So is it like where you're getting, a certain level of flooding, X amount of feet? Are these areas being hit more with a storm surge? We might be asking, things like that. And then as I mentioned, this lays the foundation, the modeling lays the foundation for the vulnerability and risk assessment. Like I said, we overlay them. The risk is determined based on the values of these assets, the likelihood that they're going to flood, the severity that they're going to flood in the future, and will result in identification of short and long-term projects. A good example is another area that we worked in not that long ago. We found that the municipality had during, I think it was one of the big major storms within the last 10 years, they had all of their records stored in the basement of a municipal building. And of course, the municipal building flooded and they lost historic records. Okay, so one of the key things is making sure that that doesn't happen in the future. So we would be talking to them about those types of assets. What's the most important thing in a town hall? What do you need to protect at the fire station? Have you already moved these things so that they're elevated above flood levels? Based on the future flood levels, are they still elevated? to a reasonable condition? Or do you have to start and take these things out of those areas that could potentially flood in the future? So that's an example of something that could be a concept to make change. The projects in terms of recommendations that could come out of the plan will generally fall within these 4 areas. One would be from the planning perspective, are there changes that might come about in the plan of conservation and development? Could they be saying that an area you need to retreat from developing, not develop in specific areas? Maybe if there's an incident and houses get demolished, how much can be rebuilt in an area? Some states have what they call buyouts, where the state or local entities buy them out of the flood area. They want to create more open area that would be flood storage. To get people out of flood-prone areas. These are all things that may come about in your comprehensive master plan for a municipality. Land use regulations, like I mentioned, could be anything from roadway elevations to, raising of houses, things like that. It could be making sure that there's proper drainage in developments as they take place. Storm retention, those will be looked at in recommendations we've made with regard to a zoning code. Capital improvements are physical things that can take place. It could be a living shoreline, which means that it's a planted shoreline rather than bulkhead areas so that it can absorb some of the waters. It could be things like, building up almost like a dune or a berm in certain areas. It could be raising of roadways to protect vehicles and access. And capacity building deals with making sure that we have people aware of the situation as time is going along. Homeowners, people coming through, evacuation, as I mentioned before. These are all forms of being more resilient because you don't want people to get stuck when the floodwaters come in, stuck in their homes with no way out. That's part of what resiliency is all about. The types of projects that we deal with, like I said, it could be the raising of a home, it could be creating more open space that would be flood capacity in the future. It could be doing something along the shoreline that would make the area more resilient. When we identify elements in the plan, we're going to be talking about prioritizing them, identifying a lead entity or person that would make the implementation take place, key partners in it. Is it an agency of a specific municipality? Is it municipalities working together? Some of these will have cost estimates that go along with them and timeframes that they could be accomplished in. Telling you what the immediate next steps would be, and identifying potential funding sources. So there are some that we're becoming more and more aware of as a potential funding source when somebody's looking to do something. The ARPA funding that came down to municipalities, recovery funding, has helped many municipalities making improvements. And we'd be looking at that type of stuff as to what's taking place as we're moving forward in terms of funding. The conceptual development of high priority projects we're going to be looking at. This is where we're going to identify probably 3 to 4 projects per municipality, and then 2 that would be more regional in nature. That would be in terms of creating concepts that go along with the prioritized list. And it could be anything from designing an area to, identifying a model code, things like that would be part of it. And then just time-wise, we're looking at a draft plan in May of 2024 and finalizing the plan the next month in June. So some of the timeline as it's playing out, as I mentioned, community engagement will take place throughout. So forums like this, at this point we're doing data gathering. At other points we'll be reporting out to you as to what we're seeing, asking for your opinions on priorities, and then then later on, towards the end of the project, it will be telling you what concepts we have developed throughout this. So you can see that the project startup took place. We're already in the sea level rise scenarios. Probably right before the new year, we'll be into the risk assessment part of this. So in terms of public engagement, and that's what we would call a forum like tonight, we have lots of different ways that we're gathering information, trying to get out to as many different age groups as possible, locations as possible. There's a project website at the back of the room, and I have some information if you haven't gathered it. Almost every document that we have out there has the project website on it. We ask for your assistance in going to the project website and identifying areas that you think fit what we're looking for here. Areas that would be assets, an area that should be looked at, and areas that you have known flood conditions in. Even if somebody has pointed it out already, do it again. Because the more that we're hearing on certain areas, we're learning that some might be somebody just saying, oh, you know, I saw this one time. Others, it's a constant condition. And if lots of people have seen something, it's important for us to note it, and it's important for us to be looking at those areas. So that's the project website. You can also just add comments in there. We monitor it regularly, so this information is being pulled down. It's an interactive map, so you could go on to it at different intervals and see what other people are adding. Like I said, we have the executive committee, the community workshops, or things like this, the stakeholder meetings. Some of them are Zoom phone calls, some of them are one-on-one, some of them are focus group type situations. The online mapping tool, which I just mentioned, and pop-up events would be like, we were just at the Old Saybrook Arts and Crafts Fair, telling people about the project, asking them to go online and give us their information. And you'll see after I finish the talk, we have maps on the side. If you want to just go and put sticky notes on an area with your comment, you could do that as well. All that gets downloaded to the mapping tool. This is the project website. It's easy to get around. Lots of people have been commenting that they've been going to the website. They like that there's information about upcoming events on there and information about the project itself to give you an idea of what is involved. This is the website up top. Like I said, you don't have to necessarily write it down. It's on all of the information. This is what the interactive mapping tool looks like when you go online. So there's different, ideas of what should be included. It's color-coded when you get there to tell you which is an asset comment, which is, a flood area issue. So you can read about the project, get access to some of the resiliency resources that we're using, learn about the events. You can comment on your own time. So you don't have to spend 10 minutes back there. If you don't have the time tonight, we want you to go there and spend the time to let us know what is needed. And subscribe to the project website. With that, we'll have your information, and we reach out the opposite way too. We'll be sending out blast emails. Anybody that got it from us through the website, you get a message when we're having an event, or if there's information that we're asking you to do, it will go out through the project website as well. And just add your assets, your issues, and where you think there's opportunities on this interactive map. We do like to engage all age groups. So if you have children, if you have high schoolers that are driving and they see things or tell you something, or the school bus is getting stuck somewhere because of a flood issue, let us know. Ask them their opinions. When they come to a booth that we have, we're asking them their opinion too. And it's really interesting to hear from a child's perspective where they see something taking place, because generally it's telling them, I can't go play here, I can't go do something. So we do get interesting information that way. And it's also important for them to learn about the process and what resiliency is all about. In terms of some of the community workshops, right now, as I said, we're in the data gathering stage. We will be bringing it back out during risk assessment and during the plan. We had that meeting already last week, and there's another in-person workshop if you want to tell people about it. It will be the same type of presentation, same type of activities in Old Saybrook on the 10th. For people that you might want to just mention, you know, what this was all about and invite them to attend. Like I said, we've been out to the beaches, even we have pop-ups that will be going throughout this. We were at Old Saybrook at the fair. We've actually done some touring around with the executive committee where they identified stuff to us right in the field. We walked certain areas that flooded. We looked at outlets in areas that could use help. We looked at where the river was coming in to a marsh area to see what's being impacted. That was a very, very important part of our data gathering. We could be doing this in lots of different places. You may see us around. People stop us, ask us what we're doing, where we're gathering information. And some of what we've learned so far. These are places where we've gone. As I said, we did the driving tour. We look at the interactive map to see where people are telling us. A lot of it is visual in terms of what we're seeing. A lot of it is roadway flooding. We're seeing where utilities are raised above the ground, like, you know, even septic tanks. We're starting to notice like areas that do have, you know, major water lines on them, landings near the water that have been impacted over time, some buildings that just haven't been reoccupied, or businesses since flooding that took place a long time ago. So these are all being recorded. And things that we're hearing about in terms of assets. I've mentioned a number of them, but a lot of this area, there's a lot of historic and cultural features that need to be identified, especially if they were low-lying, close to a roadway, could be impacted over time. The docks, the marinas, and the beaches, we've gotten lots of information coming in those areas. Areas where people have identified either dunes that have diminished over time, that could be reconstituted. There are areas where we've been told about public docks getting washed away, docks that people have at their own homes that end up, you know, getting loose and down the river a bit. Firehouses that are in flood areas, like I mentioned, the recreation. So I think that these are ideas to give you of what we're hearing at this time, but also that you can add to if you have any information. Right, some of the issues that have been mentioned have been damaged seawalls, the erosion, the the roadways flooding, high tide flooding. Now this, we're getting a lot of interesting information regarding the high tide flooding with people that have longevity in the municipalities that say, you know, 20 years ago this did not happen here. Now it's happening at a regular frequency, you know, that we're seeing it multiple times a year. In some places it's multiple times a month. And I see people shaking their heads, so I know because we actually went out to see a few sites with folks where this is happening. And you know, to have the time when you're driving into your house on a high tide is like amazing, because you say to yourself, well, was this happening, you know, for how long was this happening, you know, was there any way to control it, you know? And like you said, septic system failures we're hearing about. These are specific locations. Now, we do appreciate getting specific locations on the map or by name where they could be identified, because roadways too, you know, if you can't be really specific on, tell us the road that something's on. These are some that have come out in meetings that we've had so far. But that's important when you're going into the interactive map, or if you're doing it on a paper map that's at one of these presentations. Tell us not only, you know, what's happening, but pinpoint the area. That's great for us. And then in terms of next steps, I mentioned, you know, that we'll be moving on to this is the asset inventory. We have the hydraulic modeling starting now. There's a lot more stakeholder meetings that will be one-on-one meetings and focus groups with some of the key stakeholders that we need to gather information from, and there'll be continued public outreach throughout this. Again, the October 10th is the next date, and this is the website once again. And I think that's it. Thank you to all of you for this. I could take a few comments if you have anything, but the important part is our next step is to invite you. There's maps from all the municipalities back there. If you want to spend time tonight and put notes on them, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, we would ask that you use the interactive map. Again, all that information is being downloaded. It will go into spreadsheets that we'll be analyzing and going back out in the field to look at these sites. Yes.
Can you upload photos to the website?
Yes, I believe that you can. And if you have any problem with that, because somebody had mentioned that once before they asked, I believe that it works. If you have any problem though, just send us a little note and we'll send you an email address to send them to. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And videos too?
I'm not sure about the video, but just check, and like I said, if you can't do it through that portal, we'll give you an email to send it to.
It sometimes takes about 48 hours generally when you try to upload, and the videos are still problematic.
Okay. Photos actually are almost better for us. I mean, the video we'd like to see, but photos that we can actually use, that's important. We did ask people a couple of weeks ago when there was going to be a big rain that didn't do a lot of damage ultimately, you know, to take photos for us. And then the one the other day when nobody was expecting much, people were coming up to the booth saying, that roadway flooded out terribly, you know, and then somebody sent me a whole bunch of photos after the old Saybrook there. So it was great to see the spot that they were talking about. Any other? Yes.
In your planning stage, are you considering Netherlands type of approach?
What kind?
Netherlands.
Oh, the Netherlands? That's really interesting. I didn't tell you a little bit about myself. I actually was the planner for the New Jersey Meadowlands Commission for over 30 years, and we did work with the folks from the Netherlands on a number of alternatives. I bring some of that to this project, which is interesting. Things like wetlands mitigation, kind of taking down some of the wetlands areas to create more flood capacity. We will be looking at some of that, yes. Any other comments?
I have one
Yeah.
question. Did you say what the grant amount was for from Fish and Wildlife?
It was to do the actual planning work.
The amount, the grant.
I don't know.
150,000.
150,000. That's not too much, is it?
No, it's just to do the plan. I mean,
I see.
the plan, by going through this planning process, it sets us up, sort of pre-qualifies us for their next phase of grant funding.
It's iterative process.
Yes, and so, you know, they have a model that has to be met and some requirements that we have to meet. But once we go through this process, identify the projects, it's not guaranteed. However, it positions us much better to qualify for the implementation of the plan.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you.
Thank you.